Hi, and welcome back to Telium's EMEA Summer School, The Future of Data and AI. I'm Marinda Hillier, and in today's lesson, AI for Data Collection, we'll go deep into one of the most critical factors for AI success, how and when you collect your data. You'll hear from Dustin and Telium's principal CDP strategist, Rob Anderson, as they unpack the real-world friction brands face when trying to operationalize AI and how intentional structured data collection can be your biggest unlock. From consent and identity to data normalization and enrichment, this session lays out the must-haves for a scalable, AI-ready foundation. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Telium's AI Masterclass. This is lesson number 2, and I am joined today by Rob Anderson. Rob and I have been working together at Telium for a few years now, and one of the things that's great about Rob is how familiar he is with Telium, the technology and the people here. In fact, when he first started, I had been working here a few years already, and Rob knew as many, if not more, of the people here as I did. So I'm excited to have Rob here to share his experience. Welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm Rob Anderson. I'm a principal CDP strategist at Telium. I've been at Telium for almost 4 years, but I've worked with Telium for the better part of the last 13. So before I came to Telium, I was a Telium customer myself. And then before that, I was an agency partner. So I've worked on kind of all different sides of the Telium relationship equation. And I use all those lessons learned from all those different places to work with our current customers and figure out what their best path to value is using the Telium products they already own.
Perfect. And Rob really is going to be the perfect person to bring this session to you. We're in session 2. Session 1, if you remember, I was talking with Jeff about the state of the industry overall, the complex pressures and opportunities that we're all facing in light of this new AI revolution and how to best manage that. With Rob today, we're going to dive into the data foundation. I'm sure Rob will agree that every project, every opportunity, every initiative we've ever worked on, whether from the customer side, the agency side, or within Telium, they've all had differences, but one thing they've all shared is they've needed to have a strong and consistent data foundation to have any sort of success. And that only becomes more true when you're talking about it with AI. So with that, I'll turn back over to Rob to tell us more about data as a foundation.
Yeah. So the reason why we're here and having this conversation today is really, we want to look at how AI can unlock a lot of value. But first, we need to make sure that the data we feed into AI, it's trustworthy, clean, and able to be activated in a timely and real-time way. And customers are becoming increasingly aware that AI is shaping kind of the state of the world, and that there's a lot of customer data that's out there that can be used in interesting ways to kind of unlock value both for brands and for consumers. So everyone's trying to figure out what you want as a consumer, but being able to use and activate that data has been a challenge. So everyone's really racing to use AI to unlock productivity in this area. But a lot of brands have been struggling with data readiness, and there's friction everywhere, right? So batch processes, challenges with consent, whether or not you're actually able to use the data that you've collected, and then just disconnected systems that aren't ready to use that data in the right context at the right time. And at the end of the day, customers expect relevance at scale, and AI can help us get there, but only if our data supply chain supports it and we set ourselves up for success there. So AI is truly eaten software. On a daily basis, even I've started using LLM capabilities to power my productivity, to increase the ability and the output that I'm able to deliver for our Telium customers. And the industry as a whole is reaching for more productivity, more data, and the ability to optimize these models. And these models are really only as good as the data that you can provide to it and the context you can provide, right? So the more you work with a model, the more you train that model, the better that model tends to perform over the long run. But it's really your success with AI is going to be based on your ability to collect that data, the ability to give that data context in a way that an LLM or AI can understand it. And then finally, to actually put that data into action, right? To make sure that that data is available where it's needed to power those AI experiences.
Yeah, it's so true. It was always said software is eating the world, and now AI is eating software. There's always the bigger fish, as they say.
And so moving large amounts of data at enterprise scale, historically, we looked at things like ETL processes, moving data around through queries, doing this in batch, doing this through the use of APIs sometimes. But the act of providing user identity, resolving that to a single view of the customer required a lot of compute, a lot of data wrangling. And that just delays your time to activation with AI. And all of these different AI use cases, that they have different needs and context and the ability to activate on that data. And the more you have to move your data around within your four walls to be able to provide that context, the harder it is going to be to activate.
Yeah, I think one of the unseen weights of data wrangling is the impact on the people who have to do it, right? No one goes into data science or AI science to wrangle data. That's like asking a chef to go in to cook, and the first thing they have to do is clean all the dishes, right? It might be part of the job in some aspect, but it's not what you look forward to. And so the more you can cut that down, then the more the people get to be energized by the actual work they get to do.
Right. And that really brings us to kind of one of the core ideas in this lesson, right? Like the ecosystem really has a market need for that consistent, flexible hub where data can be collected in real time from all of our different systems, wherever they are in the enterprise. And then enrich that data with consent, with structure, with context, and then make it ready for activation with all of those bullet points in mind. For our AI tools like LLMs, like personalization engines, and so much more. And so I think that really sets up, kind of today's core ideas. Like your infrastructure needs to support this kind of hub, providing consent, identity, and orchestration across your whole stack. And this isn't really about one tool, right? It's about the strategy that lets AI work with that agility.
Yeah. Something's got to connect those dots, and the more powerful that something is, then the more efficiency you gain from and opportunity you gain from that data that you are collecting.
Absolutely. So what makes data agile and actionable? Right? I think it comes down to these 6 things, right? So being able to take siloed business nomenclature and map that to an open schema that can be used and understood across the enterprise. Providing some normalization for that data, right? So making sure that data has consistent structure and typing, no matter where it's used. Providing context and scope to that data. So that data should have some kind of scope that does this data represent a single event that's taking place, or a session, or a person, or some kind of audience segment, right? Giving that data to AI or an LLM, and providing that scope and context to it is huge, because now the LLMs, the AI models, they're working with much more structured data as opposed to data that's unstructured, that you now have to do that additional level of training on the model of what data represents to them. If you can provide that representation at the time you're delivering that data, you're much more positioned to deliver that AI experience at the scale you want to. And, so along the way, to enrich that data, it needs interoperability, right? So that the ability for multiple systems to kind of all speak that same language. And then, we'll come back to this, a lot. I'm sure, Jeff talked about this in the last lesson. None of this really moves forward unless you have the consent and the ability to deliver that data where it's needed, right? So if the user hasn't given you permission to use that data downstream, you need to kind of stop and think about whether or not that data can move forward. And what we often find, kind of one of the traps with large data is you only discover that you don't have consent right at the end, right when you're about to activate it on it. And if you've already trained a model on unconsented data, you have to essentially throw away that entire training set and start over. And then the last thing is we want to deliver the data at speed, and the speed that our customers expect. And so customers, again, are hyper aware that these kind of training tools are out there, that they're feeding data to it through every interaction with a brand. And they've come to expect a kind of a more personalized, more welcomed experience based on the data they're already providing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And this will come up again, all of these really, but especially that speed point when we're talking in our next sessions about the different applications. Speed is one of those limiting factors that if you can't get it fast enough, that really will prohibit the application, even if you have the best model in the world. But all of this really, I think, fits well into a larger framework that we can dive into in kind of an interactive whiteboarding session here, Rob. So let me go ahead and pull this up. And for me, what this really boils down to is the question of how do you get data from where it is created to where it can be valuable in the most efficient and quickest and reliable way. This is a big problem. This is maybe one of the biggest problems that most software are trying to solve in some way, especially when you take this as the generic statement here, right? When we're talking about product data or just any sort of data, government, like all of the data that gets generated in our world right now, for it to actually be purposeful, has to go under some level of transformation and journey to get to where it's actually actionable or reportable or visible. And today, for our purposes, what we're really talking about is customer data is created. And at some point, we want that customer data to be valuable for AI or ML, right? And so when we have this framework that we're starting to work with, for me at least, it becomes very clear why all the things you were just talking about, Rob, are so important. For one thing, like we were just saying, as is always true, you want this to be as short and as quick of a route as possible. And then within this, there are several steps that need to happen. But for me, one of the things that really becomes clear is that you'll sometimes hear people talk about like, well, what is this a real-time use case or not? Is this a real-time use of my data or not? And I think that's so backwards when you're looking at it from this lens, that real-time really should be the default state of how you want to take advantage of your data. Use it as quickly and as efficiently as you can. And then if there's a need to put something in batch or to store it before it gets activated, then look at what those processes need to be. But as long as you have the opportunity, use this data as quickly as possible. How's that sitting with you, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's less about real time versus batch and when that customer data is surfaced up to be consumed, right, by a AI or ML model. Right. And that data could be surfaced in real time, like through a sequence of, real time app or website interactions, or it could be, data that's already been kind of pre-processed and is been read in through, say, like, a cloud data warehouse. Mm-hmm. And so, so a cloud data warehouse isn't going to necessarily compute that data in real time, but as soon as it does, we want to be able to make that data available as quickly as needed. Right, for AI and ML, right? And so it's basically how fast can we get the data into this pipeline once it's ready to be consumed and moved out to the other side.
Right. And so for the rest of this conversation, I think what would be helpful, what I want to hope to do here is to illustrate some items that need to take place in this journey and illustrate for you all whether that needs to happen closer to collection and creation of where that data originates from, or whether it's better for those things to happen closer to activation and to where that data is actually going to be valuable. And so the first thing that we have to deal with that you talked about here is consent and that initial identity. This has to be the first question you ask once the data is collected is, do I know who this data belongs to? And do I know if I have permission to do anything with this data or not? Because the answer is no to that consent question, then you are only putting yourself in more jeopardy the longer you let this go down that route. Or if you only have data or permission to do certain things with it, then again, you want to filter that out as quickly as possible. That initial identity piece and why we specify that as its own specific component of this is because there's going to be other opportunities to introduce more identity later on. But from that first interaction, there should be some level of identifier so that you're not having to reestablish consent with every interaction that happens. The next piece is I'd love to get your take on, Rob, because I know this is a big part of what you deal with our customers. But once you know you have permission to be handling this data, what becomes so clear is exactly like you were talking about, that normalizing, that labeling, that business standard language and scope that you can apply to the data. Why do you think that's so important to do?
Yeah, so I think, there's 2 points here. One is just identifying what kind of data this is, right? So like, is it related to an event? Is it related to an attribute that we need to store against that visitor record? Are we able to stitch, kind of two records together, like once we've determined kind of that initial identity? And just without labeling and kind of a consistent way of identifying those records within your system, enrichment just becomes chaos, right? So that's what we're really looking to avoid here is, kind of turning this into a lot of different siloed systems that are not speaking the same language and are just generating chaos for you. Let's simplify that as much as we can, as early in the process as we can, so that we're able to provide that normalization. Like really what we're doing here is we're providing metadata about the data, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really crucial to provide that context. The closer you get to AI and ML activation, they're going to need that context when they're actually acting on that data so that they don't have to be trained and derive that context on your own. That's very time consuming for AI and ML to train itself up on context with unstructured data. And here what we're really doing is providing that structure for AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that it happens earlier in the process, shifting more towards this side of the frame, it allows it to be consistent again for the rest of the journey, which allows the processes of whatever you want to do with that data be consistent because you know that it's going to be a normalized and standardized set, which gets us directly into one of the things you can now do with data once you do have that kind of data about the data in a standardized way, is that you can actually start adding into it the additional data points that you need, or the other context that you have, additional identities that you want to be resolving into that. And if you have these reversed, then you're going to have to rewrite or account for a lot of different variations for what needs to be enriched when. But once you have that standardized and again consented and identified data set, now you can actually start to make inferences about that data in a consistent way, no matter where it's coming from or when you got it, because it's going to be in that standard. But one thing to point out is we're putting all of this more towards this left-hand side because this is, again, the originator. And so this gives us the confidence in what we're doing to this data to know that more about the data set that it's coming from. So if I'm going to enrich something about my data set, the closer that is to where that data actually originated, the less likely it is that I have to guess what I'm enriching about that data. For example, things like the time zone even, or if you're going to be standardizing a date to indicate what day of the week it is or whether it's a weekend or not. Those things become easier to understand about the data overall when you're closer to when that data is originating, versus if you're guessing, okay, was this when the event happened, or was this when I stored it, or those sorts of things. So you always want to be doing as much as you can with the data as close to where the data comes from as possible, so that you're as accurate as possible in that data set that ultimately gets clumped together for what you're going to be processing with it.
Yeah, and the way I've always thought about this is, the further away data gets from its kind of center of gravity, right? If we think about this as a solar system, the further away you go from the center of the universe, the less bright, right, the star looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the further out you get in this process, the harder it is to actually remember where your origin is and find your way back to there. Right? So when we're doing enrichment and manipulation, resolving identity, these are all additive processes where we've already decided whether or not we have permission to do something with the data. We have it in a standard format. And now we're really adding more data on top of what we've already learned just along the journey. And the nice thing about this is, when you get to that point where you're starting to add data and add identity to this stream, you always want this to be a process that kind of takes place after you've decided whether or not you can act on this data and put it in a standard format, rather than after the fact and realize that at this point, when we're adding a bunch of data into the equation, then we have to throw it away because we didn't get consent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It always comes back to having that consent first, and consistent, and then persisted throughout the journey. And obviously, we're talking about a very simplified journey here. Each of these things can happen multiple times at multiple spots within any journey for one set of data. But the point we're wanting to illustrate is the relationship to how you want to keep it closer to the origin versus the actual place of where it's going to be used. The exception to that rule here, and the last piece we'll add, is when you're actually ready to start segmenting and filtering and mapping that data for a specific purpose. That you want to hold off until as close to where it's ready to be activated as possible. Again, this comes down to that efficiencies. If you start segmenting or start mapping the data set into a vendor-specific nomenclature or something earlier on in this process, then you're just creating more opportunity for where you're going to have to duplicate your processes or duplicate your business logic or instructions for the segments and the enrichments you want to do to that data. So you want to hold that off until you're just about ready to use it, and then make whatever modifications are necessary or filters or segmentations for that data set just before you pass it off to where it's going to be valuable, whether that's an activation point or a reporting suite or whatever that might be.
Yeah, and this is really key to me, because one of the things that we want to make sure is that only the right data makes it across that last hop, right, to when it's actually being consumed by our AI or ML engine. So we hold off until the last possible moment to make sure that we have all of that context, all of that identity, all of that metadata, as much as we can, collected, collated, and resolved. And then at that last second, we make a segmentation and a mapping decision to send the full data payload to where it needs to be. So we're not missing anything and having to make a second round trip to fuel more AI about that individual. Right? So we wait till the last second so that the AI gets the full payload.
Yeah, absolutely. The one last piece I'll say, and then we'll jump back and wrap up here, is that the one additional way that AI influenced this data set. Rob did a great job illustrating why consent is vital. You're going to have to throw everything away if you don't have that. Why normalizing and labeling really becomes the superpower that unlocks what the AI is, or ML is going to be able to see in the data. But one other aspect that is a transition for me is we often used to talk about only collect the right data, only handle the data that you're going to be using, because I'd so often seen things get bloated and beyond what could be maintained as a data dictionary. And there's still some wisdom in making sure you have an architectural lens and intentionality with the data. But one of the cool things that AI and ML locks within a data set is being able to see pattern and value in data that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to see it. And you don't want to apply your own human lens as a filter that's going to limit your AI and what it's going to be able to do. So you want to be able to enhance your data with additional attributes that you might not have a use for or have seen a pattern in before, but it may be able to do. I brought one up earlier. I think like days of the week and weekend or other seasonality, you think, oh, a computer can read a date timestamp. Fine. Why would I need to do that? And sometimes it can, and I'm sure there's some models that could be able to see pattern there. But the more you're able to spell these types of interesting data points out to an AI or ML, the more likely it is to grab onto those and generate a pattern that's interesting or incorporate it into reasoning that's going to affect the outcome there. So you always want to be thinking of how you can be providing the most resources there for the tool that's ultimately going to be consuming it. Okay, so with that, let's head back into the slides real quick for a wrap up and summary of anything else you want to add to this conversation, Rob.
Yeah. So, it's going to close out on this. Real progress with AI, it comes in stages. You're not going to instantly overnight get to progress with AI. You have to build out your pipeline, be iterative, experiment, start small. And the only way that this works is with having the right data foundation. And so by constructing that pipeline between the data source and the data activation in a very careful, consistent, compliant way, that's the way you're going to succeed with UI or with AI. And start small, right? So, start with, simple propensity modeling, start with simple RFM scoring, and then kind of graduate from there.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's those small, consistent iterations that build into momentum that create large change rather than trying to do something too big and not being able to see it all the way through. So absolutely great insight, Rob. Really appreciated this conversation. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. That idea of growing into maturity is going to come up again in this next session 3. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you for your time.
Thanks for joining us for lesson 2. Now that you understand what it takes to build a clean and actionable data foundation, we'll turn our focus on how to activate it. Next week in lesson 3, which is called Journey Orchestration with Traditional AI, we'll explore how AI is powering real-time decisions and hyper-personalized experiences at scale. You won't want to miss it.